The Chicago Bears are setting themselves up for a monumental collapse. The Bears are setting themselves up for a monumental collapse. Look, there's no long-term quarterback. Bears fans were excited to see Trubisky. Yay, we get Trubisky back. Oh, yeah, no more Foles. Well, it turns out both quarterbacks are not good. So whether you're a Trubisky lover, a Foles lover, it doesn't matter. Both of these quarterbacks are not good. This is all on Ryan Pace. Ryan Pace, you're going to get beaten up. And I know this is coming early on in the episode, but I got a rant coming. Ryan Pace, poor drafting, bad in free agency, horrible in player development, an aging defense, and the head coach has lost the room. And there is no leadership in that locker room. The head coach doesn't have it. Nick Foles thought he had it. Oh, we'd rather lose ugly. All that stuff. No, win ugly, whatever he said. Look, there is no leadership on this roster. There is no fight on this roster. And that was the worst Bears defensive performance I have seen in my lifetime. And I'm sick of it. There's going to be change coming, and I cannot wait for it. Matt Nagy, pack your things because you're out. Same thing with Ryan Pace. Ryan Pace, pack your things because you're out. And both of these people come in at the same exact time. Obviously, Pace before Nagy. But, oh my gosh, this is horrible. You're 5-1 to start the year. How can you let it unravel like this without any significant injuries? It's just bad coaching and bad offense altogether. Bill Lazor, Matt Nagy, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It's the same old Bears. They haven't had a quarterback in their entire franchise. Anyway, Slig, welcome in. I'm heated.
I can tell. Thanks for that warm welcome there, bro. I definitely understand where you're coming from for sure. It was not a good game for the Bears. I do want to point out one thing, though. You said there's no fight on the Bears. Just tell that to Javon Wims. He showed some fight a couple weeks back. But other than that, it was definitely an embarrassment for the Bears, who bottomed out, lost their fifth straight game, got absolutely embarrassed by their big rivals in the Packers on prime time. Another terrible performance in prime time for the Bears. Same week, or a different week, same story in that regard. So they're 5-6 now after the 5-1 start. But honestly, even though I didn't think it would turn around this quickly, I can't say I'm totally shocked. A lot of the first 5 games that the Bears did win, they had 2 massive comebacks. They barely held off the Giants in week 2. So the warning signs were absolutely there. But I don't know if I saw it unraveling this quickly.
Realistically, they really only had 2 halves of good football in those first 2 games. You mentioned the first quarter of the Lions game of the opener. Everyone's like, bench Mitch. Anyway, he came out in the second half, and there he goes. He goes on his little run that showed some life. And then the other game, it took him a little while. Foles comes off the bench, and Foles puts up a performance that leads them to the win against the Falcons. But it doesn't matter the quarterback. This offense there's no hope for this football team. I've said it in episodes before. Allen Robinson cannot wait to get out of town, and I do not blame him. If I was him, I'd run as far left as I could from this organization.
Well, I said the same thing. I know we all know that Allen Robinson has gone after the season. You mentioned Green Bay as a landing spot. I could see it. That would make him very popular in Chicago. But could you really blame him at this point? He's going to go somewhere that has a competent quarterback, because he's a wide receiver 1, and he's just not. I mean, he had a solid statistical game in the Packers game last night, but at the same time, he wants to go somewhere where there's a quarterback who can consistently hit him on a throw, and he hasn't had that in his career in Jacksonville or Chicago so far. In terms of this particular game, we can go into it a little bit. So Mitch Trubisky was back as the starting quarterback. Foles had the hip injury in the Monday night game 2 weeks ago, and it wasn't great. He's more athletic than Foles. There's no question about that. He's the more physically talented quarterback. Foles is the more mentally talented quarterback, but neither one of them are going to lead the Bears offense to much. And Trubisky had some moments at the beginning of the game, but then the sacks came out, the turnovers came out. He had that brutal fumble in the second quarter, and it just all unraveled after that. And he threw into double and triple coverage about 14 times. There was some very poor decision-making throughout the game.
Yeah, he just didn't have it. I mean, he had garbage time stats. So if you're looking at the stats, just wash your memory of them, because it really wasn't there. Going back to Allen Robinson, look, I'm not saying he's anywhere near this player, especially right now in his career. But another name that I think of that never had a quarterback was Andre Johnson, and he put up a great career with the Texans because he had no quarterbacks there. I mean, you had Matt Schaub for a little while. I guess he might be a Blake Bortles type. But outside of that, I mean, Allen Robinson really didn't have a legit quarterback. So I think he's out of town. But talking about the Packers game, which was an embarrassment on Sunday Night Football, of course, Aaron Rodgers sitting on the sideline, chuckling, having the dandiest of times, throwing touchdowns to Tunyon, Mercedes Lewis, Alan Lazard, Devontae Adams. I mean, he's just loving life because he knows that he can absolutely destroy the Packers. The Bears are now 2-9 against the Packers under Ryan Pace, and he's got to go. But one thing I did see as a positive from this game, I always like to look at positives. I know maybe not early in this episode, you can tell, but David Montgomery popped a big run. Of course, he didn't have the speed to get there because no running back on the Bears have had speed since Forte, and even then you can question it. But he popped a big run. I think with Trubisky at quarterback, that helps out the run game immensely because you don't have a statue of Nick Foles back there to where you have nowhere to run. But I think David Montgomery can have the greatest impact of any player on this team with Trubisky under center if they still elect to go to him. Frankly, I do not care what quarterback starts because I cannot wait till the offseason.
Now, I understand where you're coming from there. I do want to make one point. Comparing Schaub to Blake Bortles is pretty disrespectful right there. I definitely would not go that far. Overall, I'm not saying Andre Johnson had great quarterbacks in his career, but Schaub had a couple of solid seasons. I think that's more than you can say for Bortles. But anyway, looking at the Bears here, Montgomery, that might have been his best game in a Bears uniform. He looked pretty dynamic out of the backfield. I know a lot of the stats he had came in garbage time as well, but he was running solidly. You take away that 57-yard run. He was still averaging 4.5 a carry, which is pretty good. It was a threat out of the backfield. So solid game for him. Robinson is going to be gone. He put up some empty stats. He looked better with Trubisky. Overall, you mentioned Trubisky might be able to help the run game. I think it can if they use him in more zone read type of situations, similar to what I've said about the Giants with Daniel Jones. He's an underrated athlete as a quarterback. He can definitely provide some sort of spark in the running game. It's not going to be much, but at least keep the defense off guard a little bit. It might open up some holes for Montgomery or Cordero Patterson or whoever they want to try back there at this point. But another problem on that side of the ball is the offensive line was atrocious again for the Bears, even though Montgomery had a solid game, especially the tackles. Preston and Zadarius Smith both went off for Green Bay, and I've seen better protection from condoms that have holes poked in them. It was just ridiculous, and it's something we talked about. The Bears have had several years of a bad offensive line at this point. It's something they really need to address.
Charles Leno is the most overrated tackle in the history of the NFL. I mean, this guy's robbing the Bears. I mean, what are you doing there? Left tackle, Charles Leno. Oh yeah, you go through the line. He's the worst offensive lineman this organization's had in quite some time. And boy, there have been a lot to choose from. And he has just been atrocious all year. Run game, pass game, no feet, lazy hands. He's just not a good run blocker, pass blocker, just frankly, offensive lineman. Charles Leno, he's got to be on his way out of town. You need to address left tackle. And I want to quote David Kaplan real quick on NBC Sports Chicago. He said, look at what the Bears did in the draft. This is a shot at Ryan Pace from my side, but look at what the Bears did in the draft. 4 of their first 5 picks were on the defensive side of the ball. The first one, Cole Kmet, he's had his fair share of drops this year. I think he will end up being a solid tight end. But everything on the defensive side of the ball has been drafted and not a lot of them play. So that is huge in the eyes of the front office, with especially Ryan Pace involved.
Yeah, I'm definitely getting to the point where I think Pace needs to go. I think the Bears really do need a full clean house type of rebuild, because we kind of have touched on in the past that the Bears are kind of in that stuck in the middle type of situation where they're talented enough where they don't bottom out to get a good draft pick that can change the franchise, but they also are not good enough to make a deep playoff run or be considered serious contenders. I don't think anybody outside of the Bears fan base really thought they were legitimate serious contenders for this season, even after the 5-1 start. It's one of the luckiest 5-1 starts of all time, and the warning signs were on the wall. We're starting to see that now. The offense has been bad all season, so I don't think that can be considered a surprise at this point, regardless of the quarterback. The offensive line has been bad. I'm starting to get to the point where I think Pace needs to go, because there have been some hits in the draft, including this year. Jalen Johnson and Darnell Mooney, I think, are 2 of the better examples so far. But at the same time, this is his 6th year on the job, and the most he's been able to do. He got the 1-12-4 season where they lost to the Eagles in the playoffs. But other than that, no deep runs. They aren't sustaining anything. And right now they're just in that dreaded middle type of phase. And that's the worst place to be long term.
It's the worst place to be in any sport, too. It's not like some sports benefit. I guess you could say the NBA, you could sneak into a long playoff spot, but you're done. You're not going to win anything. I mean, it's more of a playoff appearance, which doesn't really matter. But in the NFL, you have to commit to either winning or losing, because if you don't, you're going to be stuck for a long time. I mean, it takes a while to full out tank and build your roster up, or absolutely break it, or to absolutely take off with what you have. I mean, when you're in the limbo mode, you're going to end up like a team that's like the Texans. Sure, they've had their fair share of winning the last few years, but they're in limbo mode right now. They have a great quarterback that can win them capable games, but they're never going to be someone with a top 10 pick, obviously, because Bill O'Brien traded him. But they're not going to have a top 10 pick in years, and they're not going to be a legit Super Bowl contender. So that's another team to keep an eye on when it comes to stuck in the middle. But from the Bears, I'm just sick of it. I mean, there has not been sustained success with this organization ever. And I feel very bad for Virginia McCaskey, because she's been around for a while, and this ownership has taken a deep dive. And there were times where you just feel bad for her, because she's bringing in these people that she think can run the team, but they absolutely cannot. They run it down even worse. Sure, you have a spike year from time to time, but it's so dreaded right now. I don't think anyone would want to come to the Chicago Bears to run the team or be the head coach.
Well, that's a different question to me. They're in a tough spot long term. They still have the big market thing that they can sell themselves to any coaches, executives, players. Even there is still something to be said for that. I am curious to see what happens in the offseason for the Bears a lot. I remember I kind of read up on it. McCaskey during the second season, or the final season, I mean, of Mark Trestman, they started to collapse in 2014, and then she has this infamous quote, which leads to him being fired, and it's kind of had a domino effect in the Bears organization. So the writing is on the wall here. There's precedent for the Bears to clean house after this season. I would be very surprised if they make a change in the middle of the season based on their past history and the same ownership in charge. But if it's anything like that circus in 2014 that led to the firing of the previous GM and led to Trestman going, it's going to be a complete circus. In terms of this individual Packers game, though, I do want to focus on the defensive side of the ball for a minute. We usually talk about the Bears defense keeping them in games or winning them games, and that's still usually the case, but the defense was awful in this Green Bay game. It's some of the worst defense I've seen from the Bears in recent memory. There was no pass rush whatsoever. Buster Screen was getting torched out in coverage, and Chuck Pagano didn't make the necessary adjustments. It was just way too easy for Aaron Rodgers.
He kept rushing three all game. And first, you got to think about this. Even going back to last year when the defense struggled, who was out on that defense? Akeem Hicks. Who was out last game? Akeem Hicks. So Akeem Hicks is huge for that defense. I think he's the biggest piece of that defense. If you lose him, then you're losing legit most of your defense. Look, the Packers dominated time of possession. They were absolutely destroying them in that category. The first long drive, I don't know why you deferred in the first place. You got Mitch back. You should feel good. Never put the ball in Aaron Rodgers' hands. But he is a great quarterback, Rodgers over there. I'm just disappointed. You mentioned Chuck Pagano, the defensive coordinator, rushed three without Leonard Floyd out there. And Leonard Floyd has been an absolute disaster and got away with robbery of this organization. So similar to what Trumaine Johnson did to the Jets last year, that's what not Leonard Floyd, Robert Quinn. Robert Quinn stole this team. I mean, he went in there, dipped into their pockets, and walked away with a steady paycheck for limited production.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't Robert Quinn's best game with the Bears, but the whole defense, there wasn't really much to look at. You can talk about a decent game for Roquan Smith, but that's about it. Jalen Johnson struggled a little bit. It was rough all the way around. Chuck Pagano played a ton of zone coverage, and it was mostly soft zone, a kind of bend, don't break type of approach from what I saw, and it was just not going to work against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. They're way too good and talented for that, and Pagano and the Bears didn't make any adjustments. The Packers, I noticed noticed on the broadcast, they talked about some of the motions they were using to keep the Bears linebackers from getting to a running start towards the ball. And I thought it worked very, very well. Trevathan wasn't really much of a factor in this game either. So overall, they were just outmatched, both in the coaching staff, on the field. It was just really, really brutal to watch. Yeah, I didn't get home to see the Bears game until the second quarter, so I didn't see the beginning of the game, but I saw enough, I think, to notice some of the bad trends and bad coaching decisions, as well as the just poor play from the players on the field as well. It's a bad combination.
Yeah, I just feel bad for the Bears. I just want to ask you one question. Do you think that they will win a game the rest of the year?
I'd have to look at their schedule. I don't think that they're going to lose out. They still have another game against Detroit coming up, and I think any Minnesota game could still be a toss-up. And I don't honestly know the rest of their schedule off the top of my head here, but I'd be surprised if they lose out. I do think 6-10 is a real possibility.
You know what would be really fun is if that Jacksonville game they have is Mike Glennon versus Mitch Trubisky. That would be
Ooh.
phenomenal.
I would like to see that. If the Bears lose to Jacksonville, we might see a riot. And Cleveland almost pulled it off yesterday, but if Chicago manages to lose that one, I'll get a good laugh out of it. I can't lie.
Absolutely. Speaking about good laughs and talking about a promising team, or not necessarily promising, we'll see. The first place New York Giants, something we have not seen in a very long time. The New York Giants are in first place, whether you like it or not. They're 4-7 on the year, and they are here. How excited are you about the Giants in first place?
Oh, I have thoughts. The Giants won one of the ugliest football games I have ever seen against Cincinnati yesterday, and I had the good fortune of being able to go to that game. It's Cincinnati's about 3 hours from me. Tickets were cheap. I had a solid look at everything, and I saw a very interesting and unique game from a Giants fan perspective. The Just focusing on the game itself, let's say the defense was great. The special teams, not so much. And there's a lot of question marks on that offensive side of the ball. We'll go through those one at a time in a minute. But it was that performance was all over the place.
It was all over the place. And one slightly negative note on what took place is quarterback Daniel Jones had a hamstring injury that forced him out of that game. Colt McCoy stepped in and looked decent. I thought he did enough to get the job done. But, I mean, that game was technically won before he was out. I mean, the big kick return was something that sparked the Bengals offense to basically only give them their only shot. They had a late touchdown from T. Higgins. But, I mean, the Bengals didn't score much. Like you said, great dominant performance from the defense. But the main pressing issue right now is Daniel Jones' availability against Seattle next week.
No question. And from what I'm seeing, it seems that Jones is likely to miss a game or two. He's got that hamstring injury. The hamstrings are kind of known as a notoriously tricky type of situation. Happened in the third quarter. I personally didn't notice it on the first play where he was kind of grabbing at his hamstring on the 7-yard run live. I did notice on the first time he came out of the game, on the 3rd and 2, I believe it was, where he managed to complete the pass for the first down, but he couldn't drive off of his leg at all. So I could kind of tell something was off at that point. He missed a series or two. McCoy finished that drive with a field goal. I noticed Jones go in the blue medical tent and came out, warmed up a little, came back in for 2 plays, and was clearly in a lot of discomfort, even from the upper level where I was. The first play was a handoff that he couldn't really move too smoothly. And then they tried one more pass, and it was the same as the third down where he couldn't drive off of it at all and almost threw an interception. And you could just tell he wasn't at 100%. So overall, he was playing some of his best football the last few weeks. He was having a solid game, I'd say, against Cincinnati, was keeping the ball from being turned over for the 3rd straight game, and was starting to make some solid reads, had some really good throws vertically down the field to Ingram a couple of times. Colt McCoy is without question a downgrade. I wasn't particularly impressed with him personally. He did enough, but that was mostly because the Giants defense put him in position to kick a couple field goals to make it a 2-score lead. And the special teams, I'll get to them in a minute, almost blew that anyway. But In terms of the rest of this season or the next week or two, focusing on Seattle, McCoy doesn't exactly have the livest arm in the NFL. Not a ton of arm talent there, and it's kind of a shame because Seattle's defense has been struggling. It would have been fun to see Jones go against that defense. McCoy is he's a relatively safe and smart quarterback, but I don't think he has that ability to push the ball down the field, and that's going to be a problem.
When Colt McCoy entered the game, the first thing I thought was, how is this guy still in the league? I was like, I thought this guy retired probably 3-4 years ago. I mean, the last time we saw him was with Washington, I think on a Thanksgiving game. He came in during the injuries that took place there. They tried a lot of quarterbacks that year with Josh Johnson and all that stuff. But I was just shocked to see Colt McCoy on a roster still. One thing that I see as probably a huge negative here, Daniel Jones was an effective rusher. Now, going on for the rest of the year, whether it's this week or on, I think the quarterback runs are going to be an issue. Whether it's Colt McCoy, I don't think he has the legs to compete or actually run the ball at all. He's not the best runner there is. His rushing stats will mainly come with a kneel down. But with Daniel Jones, a hamstring injury to a quarterback, I think they'd probably be cautious of how much he runs the ball, which could really, for lack of a better term, hamstring that offense.
There is no question in my mind that that's going to be the biggest downside to losing Jones and going to McCoy for however long it is. McCoy is not going to be a threat in the zone read type of situation or just straight quarterback runs, even though Jason Garrett did try that a couple times at the end of the game yesterday. And frankly, I wasn't thrilled with the two different QB sweep calls. Especially the first one where McCoy wasn't smart enough to get out of bounds and save the Bengals a timeout with 4 minutes to go. Guy behind me was yelling the same thing I was at the game. It's just, he's been in the league long enough where he should know better, but it is an important element of the Giants offense that Eli Manning never could bring to the table. I don't mean that as a slight to him. It's just he was never a rushing threat. That is one thing Jones has been able to bring to the offense. It wasn't a huge part of the game in Cincinnati. Gallman kind of took care of it from that side, but Colt McCoy is not able to do that. He just isn't. So if these opposing defenses are smart, however long he's playing, they'll sit back, force McCoy to beat them with his arm. We'll see if he's able to do that at all. And if Jones does come back after a game or two missed, or even if he plays against Seattle, I would be shocked if they run him very often, unless it's a last-ditch situation. I don't think there would be any design runs because they don't want this nagging injury to turn into a long-term type of situation. That wouldn't be good for anybody.
Yeah, and Wayne Gallman, can we talk about him for a little bit? This guy's had touchdowns in 5 straight games. He's really picked up where Saquon Barkley left off. Sure, he doesn't have the explosiveness, I wouldn't say, to take off big, but he is a nice, capable running back. He receives the ball decently, and he's great by the goal line, and I think he might cut into some of that work next year. We still have a long ways ahead before that takes place. But this year, I think Wayne Gallman has been a solid running back for the Giants. And you mentioned in the past episodes, he really hasn't gotten the opportunity on that team to finally have an established role. He's finally getting that role, and he's looking pretty darn good.
He is. If there's one thing that you can say about him, no matter what, it's that, damn, this guy runs hard. That's very obvious if you're watching it on TV or if you're at the game like I was. He just puts his all into every carry. It usually is decently effective. And he was solid again. He scored the Giants' only touchdown of the game on our first drive. That wasn't obviously not his fault, but he has found the end zone, I believe, in 5 straight games. And even this year after Barkley got hurt, it took Devontae Freeman, who also looked decent, I'd say. He also had to get hurt before Gallman could really get the keys to the running back position, and he's taken off with it. So I'm happy to see that. I do think that he has been a solid running back for the Giants, but if McCoy starts or if Jones isn't as effective as a runner, I do think it will limit him or his ability to break off big runs because defenses won't have to respect the quarterback rushing element of the offense for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, he averages 4 yards a carry this year, which is really nice for a starting running back that you didn't expect to get a lot out of this year. And one name that really stepped up against the Bengals, actually 2 names. You have Evan Ingram going over 120 yards, and you have Sterling Shepard with a 7-catch week. So 2 guys that have stuck around for a little while in New York that have had their ups and downs, both having big games and leading to a Giants victory.
Shepard is actually the longest tenured Giant, amazingly enough, in his fifth season. He's the only one on the team from the Giants' last playoff appearance in 2016. He had us another solid game out of the slot. He's the best route runner the Giants have. One of the best plays of the game for him, I think, was I believe in the fourth quarter when McCoy was in, where Shepard stumbled at the top of the route and still got up and managed to catch that pass for the first down. That's not an easy thing to do at all. And Ingram. Yeah, he is. He's something else. He had a good game. I would say he had two huge catches for I believe 53 and 44 yards were the totals. He both on vertical routes. That first quarter, he had the big catch on the Giants' touchdown drive that got them down to the 4 yard line. I believe it was. Had a step, perfect throw from Jones, and that second one was in the second half on the left sideline instead. That one was closer to me, kind of on the near side of the field, and the defender was draped all over him on that one, made an amazing catch. But Ingram also had yet another boneheaded play that killed a promising drive, led to a Bengals field goal. And he's not a guy that you criticize for not being a hard worker, because he is. And this turnover came from a good effort play, and Von Bell made a very good play on the ball. But it's just such a bad timing type of thing. The Giants had a promising drive going, and there are times with Ingram you see the flashes. They were there in this game. He had a career high in receiving yards in this game, mostly thanks to those two huge plays down the field vertically. Not every tight end can bring that to the offense, but he also has some of the most soul-crushing mistakes imaginable. There are times he looks like Tony Gonzalez, and other times I don't think he could catch HIV from Charlie Sheen. And it would be nice to see him bring a little bit more consistency to the offense, because this is his fourth season and we're seeing a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah, and the thing about Evan Ingram, like, look, Giants fans see him as a tight end that was selected in the first round, and another tight end that was selected in the first round that was up and down, hated by their fan base, was Eric Ebron. And I see a lot of similarities here. Yes, Ebron's more of a big threat that's a touchdown getter. Evan Ingram's more of a wide receiver type, but both tight ends have had up and down success where they were. Of course, Ebron left, went to the Colts, and had a big season with them. Now he's in Pittsburgh. But Evan Ingram, I think he's just so up and down. You never know which one you're going to get. And hopefully he could sure up some of these mistakes. But the time clock has been ticking on him for quite some time now. But switching over to the defensive side of things, the Giants got 2 sacks for one from Jabal Sheard and one from Leonard Williams. So the pass rush got home a couple times this week, and that was nice to see.
It was. I do want to put one more point on the offense here really quick. I would be remiss to not say this. The offensive line, except for Cam Fleming, was fantastic in the Cincinnati game. I don't think I can give the rest of them enough credit. Andrew Thomas had the best game of his career. Shane Lemieux had the best game of his career. Gates and Zeitler were solid as well. Carl Lawson was completely neutralized by Thomas in this game. The Giants didn't allow a sack. Thomas and Lemieux didn't allow any pressures even. It was just a very impressive performance from the left side of the line. Cam Fleming was the only blemish on that side. The Giants have been kind of rotating their offensive linemen. Lemieux and Will Hernandez rotated at guard, but at tackle, Fleming played the whole game because Matt Parrott missed this game due to being on the reserve and COVID list. And Fleming was just brutal all night. He had 3 penalties, and that second holding penalty when the Giants had a first down that would have allowed them to run out the clock almost came back to lose us the game, because the Giants almost lost on that last punt return. Other than that, I thought the offensive line deserves a lot of credit. But I will go ahead and transition to the defensive side of the ball now. That is why the Giants won this game, no question about it. They only gave up 1 touchdown drive. The field goal was after the Ingram turnover, so it's hard to pin that on anybody on that side of the ball. They got a decent amount of pressure. They didn't really bring a lot of blitzes. It was mostly 3 and 4 man rushes, but the secondary played extremely well again. I thought Logan Ryan had a fantastic game. He was solid in coverage. He forced that fumble off Drew Sample, I believe it was, late in the game that led to one of the Giants' field goals. And Jabril Peppers had another solid game. James Bradbury was great as usual. He wasn't targeted at all. So a lot of encouraging signs on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and Nico Lalos was the one with the interception. Probably not a name that you would think would make a play in a game like this, but hey, when you got Brandon Allen starting a quarterback, anything can happen.
Lalos, that one definitely caught me off guard a little bit. I honestly had not even heard of him until earlier in the day on Sunday. Saw that we signed him from the practice squad. I'm like, okay, sure. Went to the same high school as LeBron. Got a shout out, but that was a very cool moment for him. Got to give him credit. So I mean, I believe it was Logan Ryan who broke up that pass, and Lalos made a great diving play to make it an interception rather than an incompletion. So give him credit there. He made a memorable and important play in his NFL debut. But I think it was the secondary that was the biggest the biggest factor on the Giants defense. There were moments from the defensive line. Dexter Lawrence had a really nice play on a screen that I noticed in the third quarter, I believe. And Williams had another solid game outside of that incredibly boneheaded roughing the passer penalty on the Bengals' one touchdown drive in the fourth. But I think we're starting to see some of that Patriots approach, because one thing you'll notice in that coaching tree is that the Patriots typically prioritize the pass coverage over the pass rush. The Giants don't really have an elite pass rusher or even a decent one, really, outside of Kyler Fackrell, but they do have a lot of solid guys in the secondary. They have a lot of safety guys at the safety position. I noticed on one play they had 4 safeties in with Ryan, Peppers, Julian Love, and Xavier McKinney, who got a couple of snaps and got his feet wet in his NFL debut. And it really goes to show what the Giants are prioritizing on that side of the ball, and also the versatility that's a big key in Patrick Graham's defense.
100%. And we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the special teams performance. They got destroyed, for lack of a better term. You mentioned the punt return. The kick return was huge. And Joe Judge is a special team guy. I mean, the special teams has been up and down this year. I mean, there have been flashes. You've seen in the opener, Jabril Peppers looked like he was about to take one back on one of his returns. But then again, I mean, what do you do here? I mean, you give up the big touchdown from the kick coverage, of course. As a special teams head coach, what's your message to your guys? And do you think that that's something that'll change week to week?
His message is, don't do that again or I'm going to have an aneurysm. I said the same thing at the game to my friend who came with me, that Judge had that special teams background, and seeing the kick return touchdown right after the Giants opening drive score. And then that punt return at the end where our rookie Cam Brown, 6th round pick, made what ended up being a game saving tackle. Because if that punt return goes for a touchdown, the game's over. Let's be realistic there. And if it weren't for that sack from Jabal Sheard, who started on the Jaguars practice squad this year, and the recovery from Williams, we most likely lose that game 20-19. There's very little doubt, because Erickson was tackled at midfield, 1 first down, and they're in field goal range for Fat Randy over there. And that's what every Bengals fan was yelling, by the way, whenever he came out to make a kick. So not just me saying that to belittle him. I don't mean it like that. But the special teams overall, I'd say, has been pretty good this year. Graham Gano had 4 more field goals in this game. He has been amazing for the Giants. Riley Dixon, for the most part, has been solid punting the ball. There haven't been any long snapper issues. And the kick coverage really hasn't been a problem until that game against Cincinnati. But it was brutal. And it was that kick return in the first quarter and the turnover from Ingram, I believe, in the second quarter, that really kept the Bengals around while Jones was in the game. Because other than that, the Giants dominated, and it just wasn't reflected on the scoreboard.
Yeah, we should give some love to Graham Gano. He's been phenomenal. And speaking of Giants kickers, Aldrick Rosas banged a 50-yarder for the Jaguars on Sunday, which is crazy. But then again, look, they got a kicker now. Graham Gano signed a long-term deal. He's been in the league a long time, whether it was with Washington, Carolina most recently, and he's done his job. I mean, everywhere he's gone, he's kicked, and he's been a pretty solid kicker. Now, it's nice the Giants found someone like that, because if your offense is going to be subpar to decent, then I think it's good to have a kicker that can actually go down and make kicks. So he should be I think he might be a difference maker when come postseason time.
Well, if he keeps making 24 in a row, I'm definitely not going to complain. He's only missed 1 kick the whole season. And if he misses any of the field goals in yesterday's game, the Giants don't win. It's that simple. They needed all 4 of the field goals he kicked from varying distances. He has been great. And the Giants have had a decent amount of drama from the kicker position in the last few years with Rosas, and then going back to the Josh Brown situation. It would be nice for the Giants not to deal with that. And it looks like they do have a solution at kicker for the next couple of seasons. seasons as long as he keeps up this pace. They had Bullock, actually, the Giants did for a brief period, and Robbie Gould as well. But it looks like they might finally have a guy who can last for a couple of seasons. Dixon, for the most part, has been solid as well at punter. So it would be nice if those two can stick around and give the Giants one less area to worry about. But the kick and punt coverage leaves a lot to be desired in that Cincinnati game.
Yeah, and talking about needing a lot to be desired, we're going to switch over to the New York Jets. Oh my gosh. How many times are we going to see a pitiful performance from the Jets team? Look, Joe Flacco, I mentioned it before. He was the only reason the offense was scoring 20 points a game. Look, the teams they're playing aren't that solid. The Miami defense has been good under Brian Flores. I think they've had a sack in 17 straight games going back to last season with Brian Flores, so kudos to him. But my gosh, this Jets team is so bad, it makes me throw up. I mean, and they even had their kicker issues, whether it's Sergio Castillo, Sam Ficken, doesn't matter. They're going to miss. I mean, holy smokes. This Jets team is just, they're one of the hardest watches, if not the hardest watch this year.
There is no doubt that they are having a rough season and that we're running out of things to say about them at this point, right? How much is there else that you can really say about an 0-11 team who has a lot of the same issues week in and week out? Now, I can't lie and say that I was able to watch the Jets game this week, being at the Giants game that started at the same time. So I went back and watched the highlights and read some recaps and things like that. So might not be quite as specific on this one that I usually would be. But one thing I did notice is the Jets actually had a healthy complement of wide receivers and weapons in this game for once. Sam Darnold came back. I know that the Jets at least want to try to get something out of him to boost his trade value, if nothing else. But with the decent skill position guys the Jets have and the emergence a little bit of Mims and Rashad Perriman, Adam Gase says we can't rely on Frank Gore for 30 touches, yet they give him 16 carries in the first half. It's getting boring to criticize Adam Gase at this point, but it's very clear that he's a terrible football coach and he is not helping the situation at all. Sam Darnold, I still think has talent. I still think that the Jets offensive line, which was, I'd say, decent in this game from what I did see compared to normal games, has definitely contributed to some of the mistakes that Darnold's been making, but it's getting really rough to watch him as well. We're starting to see some of that same tendencies with the really poor decision making and the pretty bad footwork, and the flashes just aren't coming as much as we saw earlier this season, or especially last year at the end of 2019. And it's not looking good. We all know, I think, that the end of that Adam Gase and Sam Darnold era is coming, and this game was one of the uglier ones yet.
Yeah, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, former Jets quarterback, absolutely shredded him. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. He had 257 yards, 2 touchdowns, 8 catches, 119 yards for Devontae Parker. I mean, we would be worried if there wasn't a 100-yard receiver going against this Jets secondary. I mean, we would be halting and calling all measures, whether it's Jacoby Myers, Keenan Allen with 16 catches and over 100 yards, 120 yards at least. I mean, he was going nuts. And it doesn't matter. You can't stop anybody. So that defense is going to get shredded. Adam Gase, there's a 50-50 play calling. I don't know if you've heard about that, but he gave it up. But now they're going 50-50, and they have been for the last 3 weeks. It doesn't matter who's calling the plays. You're not going to score. You're not going to win. It doesn't matter. Darnold with 2 more interceptions in this game. He's not the answer, and I'm going out on a limb. Carson Wentz, Sam Darnold will not be starting in the NFL in 2021.
I could definitely see it. I do think Darnold, the Jets are going to play him as long as he's healthy, at the very least, to try to boost his trade value a little bit. They're definitely in a better position to get something of value for him than I'd say the Washington football team is in terms of trading Haskins. I think they're in a tougher spot. Those two are definitely names to keep an eye on, and places like Pittsburgh, I would say, because I could see the Steelers taking a flyer on either one of them behind Roethlisberger. I'd see Haskins being a fit there, because Roethlisberger is not a mobile quarterback, and neither is Dwayne Haskins. So you could definitely make the case that he'd fit that offense. You look for that fit for Sam Darnold. Could it be the Colts? Could it be the Broncos? The way Drew Lock has been playing, I could see something like that. But the Jets are going to have a new quarterback next season. They're going to have a new head coach. I do want to give the defense some credit here. They definitely don't have any good, reliable corners at this point. I know I've talked about Bless Austin a couple times. I think he's okay, but the Jets do not have a shutdown corner, which leads to these big games from opposing wide receivers. But the Jets defense played pretty well in this game, all things considered. They did force a couple of turnovers from Miami, giving the Jets a couple of short fields that they couldn't capitalize on. And the Jets offense went down, had the one field goal, I believe, on their first drive of the game, stalled out, and then they had a couple of short fields and got nothing out of it. And is anyone really surprised by that at this point?
Yeah, 4 sacks for the Jets defense, so that's something to keep an eye on. And Quinnen Williams had 1.5 of those, so huge game for Quinnen Williams. It's about time that we've seen a legit powerhouse game from him. He's still a young player on that team, someone to build around, which there isn't a lot of pieces to build around, but he is one of them. And things are looking up with the draft. Now, I have an insane question here. Now, first, I'm going to give my insane take. Go back to this, whether it's next year or 2 years. The starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers will end up being Jimmy Garoppolo. I have no doubt about it. Now, here's what is my crazy question for you. If the Jets end up landing Trevor Lawrence, which we all assume they will, if they end up getting the first round pick and Trevor Lawrence is a Jet, are you happy they signed Adam Gase?
Overall, the ends might justify the means for the Jets bringing in Adam Gase if they do land Trevor Lawrence and he is the franchise saver that he's being pegged to be. But overall, no, I don't think the Jets fans would be happy about it. I think they would just take the end result. The way Jets fans were looking at this, why would you want to take on a coach who failed with a division rival in the Dolphins, the team the Jets just lost to? I didn't really understand the move at the time. I know several Jets fans who hated it, and I understand why. So it might work out okay in the sense that the Jets have their pick of the quarterbacks and that they end up with Trevor Lawrence. And if he is as good as everyone seems to think he can be, then he would be worth it overall if he can help turn the Jets around. But that doesn't mean the Jets fans should be happy that Gase was brought in the first place, because he's been an absolute nightmare that has absolutely torpedoed Sam Darnold's career and put this rebuild further behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, and they traded up to get Sam Darnold. Let's not forget that. They gave up a potential Quentin Nelson pick. That's could have definitely helped their offensive line, holding anyone upright that plays quarterback there. But it's crazy. Look, when I look at hiring a head coach from a GM perspective, sometimes it's not getting those sexy names. A lot of the times, ooh, he's available. Let's jump on him. Wait a minute now. There's a reason he failed, or there's a reason he hasn't been hired yet. Let's dig deep. I look at a team like the Indianapolis Colts. Josh McDaniels. Oh, he backed out. Now we got to find someone. They do their research, land Frank Reich. Now, he wasn't being considered as an aggressive number one priority by teams. He was just happened to be there, and he stuck around. So I think Frank Reich's an underrated head coach, and the Colts did their research on getting him as opposed to just jumping into the hot topic or the sexy pick. Now, I think that would be smart for the Jets to do. If they bring in Bieniemy and it fails, that's another thing that you're going with. Now, it's tough to gauge which one you want to bring in, but I think there's someone you got to look at, and you got to think outside the box.
Well, I honestly think Bieniemy would be an interesting choice if the Jets were to bring him in. He's under that Andy Reid coaching tree. He's clearly, at the very least, creative with how he runs his offense. And I think the Jets offense could use a burst of creativity, especially with the severe limitations on the offensive line and in the running back room. So I honestly think that would be a solid hire to make, or a solid type of thought process. Whoever the Jets end up bringing in, it'll be a clear reflection on how Joe Douglas wants to run this team in New York. And his first draft class has been pretty promising, I'd say, overall. Mekhi Becton has been great. Denzel Mims has shown flashes here since he's gotten on the field. There have been some encouraging signs, but overall, yeah, I've said this about the Colts before. I think they dodged a major bullet with McDaniels backing out, because I did not like him in Denver at all, and I don't think he would have been a good fit in Indy. But their thought process at that time wasn't necessarily great. They were zeroed in on this one coach who I personally thought was flawed, and then they kind of lucked into bringing Frank Reich in. And not criticizing the hire. I like him a lot as well, and it was really classy when he kept on the assistants that McDaniel said could come with him. And I think it was a good thing that helped change that culture of the Colts organization a bit outside of the Grigson years that are pretty infamous around here. But the Jets haven't had a real good process anywhere in the last several years, basically my entire lifetime, right? In recent years, we've seen multiple failed executives with Idzik and McCagnon, and the jury's still out on Douglas, and they've cycled through a ton of head coaches in the last 12 to 15 years. We've seen flashes from Rex Ryan years and Todd Bowles years, but nothing sustainable. And you notice a couple of things there is that those two guys, the most noteworthy head coaches, I'd say, in the last 10 years or so for the Jets, they both had a defensive background. And we're starting to see, for the most part, teams need a head coach that can get the most out of their offense rather than the defense. We're seeing some of the same problems when John Fox was in Chicago or Vic Fangio was in Denver right now. I think the Jets do need to focus very hard on getting a offensive type of background coach who can work well with Trevor Lawrence in that offense next season, or if it's Justin Fields, whoever it ends up being. Because if they don't, it's going to limit the ceiling of that offense, and it's going to be kind of an awkward fit for whatever quarterback ends up there. We're seeing that pay dividends, that approach pay dividends in Arizona, for example, with Murray playing in Cliff Kingsbury's system. I think the Jets need to go a similar route.
I have a name that I think would be an interesting hire for a head coach position if you're thinking an offensive mind. Now, before you call me crazy, you got to look at this guy, Nathaniel Hackett. He's the offensive coordinator right now in Green Bay. Yes, he's not calling plays. That's Matt LaFleur's job. But you got to look at what he did. He was on the 2017 Jaguars staff as the offensive coordinator and play caller, okay? That Jaguars team had a top 10 offense. Look it up. You think I'm kidding. Top 10 offense with no Allen Robinson healthy the entire year. They were a top 5 and third down conversion, and he knows how to maximize what he has. Now, you couldn't blame him in 2018 when he had no offensive line and Cody Kessler. I mean, that was not on him. He didn't even have Fournette for most of the year. They tried Carlos Hyde. It was a disaster for him. He lands in Green Bay. The offense has been phenomenal in 2019, phenomenal again this year. I think Nathaniel Hackett might be an underrated choice for one of these teams to keep an eye on.
That definitely would be an outside the box type of move from the Jets. And I don't think there's really a precedent here to see exactly where Joe Douglas wants to go with this team. He's only been on the job for 1 year. There definitely have been promising signs from his draft class. But other than that, he hasn't really had this chance to put his fingerprints on the team yet. At this point, I'd say it's more speculation. So I do see both sides of thinking. Overall, either way, I think the Jets need to bring in a more offensive mind that can mold whichever quarterback they end up with in the draft. Because at this point, it's very clear that they're going to move on from Sam Darnold and Adam Gase. I do think thinking outside the box would be the right approach overall, but at the same time, we have seen the quote unquote safe hires really bottom out for this team, and part of that is the extreme dysfunction at the top of the organization. The Johnsons' ownership has gotten in the way before. It will most likely get in the way again, and if it does, it will hinder Joe Douglas or anyone else's ability to really build a contender in that part of New York. So if they are able to avoid those pitfalls, I think they could turn it around relatively quick. That defense still needs a pretty much full rebuild outside of Quinn and Williams, but there are one or two foundational pieces on the offensive side of the ball, I would say, and the skill position guys aren't quite as bad as most people would think they are. So the Jets do at least have some weapons for a quarterback to throw to. They need to build that offensive line and then build a secondary, and they might not be quite as far away as people think.
Yeah, and the next game coming up for the Jets is the Las Vegas Raiders, and they are following a very similar path that they had last year, where they play a 3-7 team, which was Atlanta. They ended up improving to 4-7, and they're coming off, and they had a solid record coming into that game at 6-4, I believe. And here you have a team that last year, when they got to this record and lost to a 3-7 team, they lost 5 of their last 6. So that is huge for the Raiders coming up. Now, Do you think there's any chance that happens against the Jets on Sunday?
I think John Gruden will light a bit of a fire under them because the Raiders went from almost beating the Kansas City Chiefs to getting absolutely destroyed by Atlanta. And I would be surprised if Vegas is going to play that poorly against an inferior opponent 2 weeks in a row. I wouldn't rule it out. I still think the Jets might manage to squeak out a win here. I honestly thought it was going to happen in that Patriots game a couple weeks ago. But I don't think that comparison in terms of where the organization is quite fits. The Raiders were kind of in an interesting spot bringing back John Gruden for a second term. And unless the Jets can bring back Bill Belichick, I just don't see anything like that happening. But I could see, I don't think it's impossible for the Jets to steal one, but they do need to force some turnovers from Derek Carr.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Jets, they're the thing with this though, any given Sunday, we've heard that for many years now. Anything can happen in the NFL. You think a team's a lock? I thought Vegas was a lock going back to them against the Falcons, but of course, crazier things have happened. So you never know. Given the NFL, the Jags hung with the Browns. They're now an 8-3 football team. So it's crazy. You never know what you're going to get in the NFL. But that brings us to our poll question of the week. Last week, let me pop up the results right here. Twitter poll question of the week. If the Brooklyn Nets acquire James Harden, are they the favorite in the East? And 36 votes have been tallied. 72.2% say yes. 27.8% say no. So that was the poll question results from last week. You can find that at Big City Sports PD on Twitter. And our poll question of the week this week. Assuming both head coaches, Matt Nagy and Adam Gase, are fired, which head coach opening is more attractive, the Chicago Bears or the New York Jets? That is the poll question of the week. Swig, what are your thoughts on that? Just real quick.
Well, from a head coaching perspective, it depends on who those teams end up with at quarterback. If the Jets do land the truly potential foundational talent in the draft, it would be the Jets. If the Bears are able to swing a trade and take one of those guys at the top of the draft, then I would say Chicago, only because they have a slightly better roster currently. But right now, from a head coaching perspective, just dreaming of what you could do in the future, I'd lean towards the Jets from that side.
I'd probably lean with the Jets too. Like I mentioned, the Bears are setting themselves up for a total destruction, and I think it's coming soon. So that's going to wrap it up today for the Big City Sports Podcast. Once again, check it out on Twitter, Big City Sports PD. We post previews of these videos each week, so click on that and click subscribe on here on the YouTube page. See us next time. Comment below. We'd like to get your thoughts and opinions so we can talk about them on the show. But for the Big City Sports Podcast, I'm Dylan Kearns signing off, and we will see you next time.